It looks like the timeline was running along full steam ahead and then boom, it just stopped. So I want to paint the visual for you. Here you've got the timeline, and it looks as if the timeline breaks. It looks as if there's a break in the timeline. I'm going to paint the visual for you so that you understand exactly what has occurred, how this happened, and of course, what it means for you. Where does this take us now? So there's some catch-up videos that if you want to know more about timelines, you can go watch. Timeline Wars is a very good one. Convergence Point is a very good one. Go and watch those, as well as We've Won Reality Back. That's going to give you some nice background if you want it. And of course, if you just want to skim through this video and listen to the miracle that we're living through, and I call it a miracle, but I also understand a lot of people right now are in the discombobulation of what's just occurred. So let's create clarification. So we got timeline. Here comes the visual, right? We got the timeline. Boom. Stops. So if you're looking at it from the outside, that looks scary and disconcerting. And if you're on the timeline, which if you're alive right now, you are. If you're on the timeline, it feels like you've hit a dead end. It feels, for a lot of you, please, not everyone, and I'm going to explain the different roles that the architects of the new reality have got. A lot of people are going to feel, especially the front runners, because they hit the wall first. The front runners are going to feel like, I'm breaking. They're going to feel like I'm at an end point. It's going to feel to them like they're deathly tired. It's going to feel to them like they just can't move beyond where they're at. That's a quantum breakthrough. And so here's the rest of the visual. We got the timeline hitting an end point because it's just elevated and taken a quantum jump. So imagine that was the timeline. This is where we were going. And now we have elevated without stairs. That's what a quantum jump or a timeline jump is. When there's been no time, no sequence in between one reality and another. The experience of this, it's kind of like what just happened. You also are going to, for a lot of you, feel like, I don't know if I've got the right to be where I am. It's kind of like you've walked into a room and you don't know if you're allowed to be in it. But before I talk about the result of the timeline shift, let's first look at the three people, and there are actually four, but there are three roles who have very actively participated in this timeline jump that we've just had. We got the first lot of people who I've explained to you who they are. They're the front runners. Then they are bruised, they are battered, they are worn. They feel like this is the death, this is the end, can't carry on beyond this, the repeat of old ancestral patterns. The repeat of so much, like an onslaught, like a cosmic, karmic emptying has happened. And what I mean by emptying, like if there was a karmic garbage truck, right, for these front runners, it's like the whole garbage truck just emptied on them. And what that is the resolution of karmic debris. Our ancestors are playing a big part in this timeline jump, a very, very big part, because the reason why we held so much overwhelming information, and that resulted in depression and distortions and confusions and delusions in our lives. The reason why generation by generation life got harder is because the unfair karmic treadmill that was established in the false matrix kept perpetuating karma, pain, without growth, without resolution, which means there was only accumulation. So by the time it got to you, you were carrying this dump truck, and then those front runners had the dump truck empty on their head all at once, or at least it would have felt that way. And I say to you, it's not going to have felt that way for everyone, right? Because there are also those who are the anchor points. That's a very, very important role. On the timeline, there's always going to be those people who are just unwavered, they're in peace, they are looking at everybody who might be fluttering about and in some kind of frenetic space. They're looking at all of that, but they're not participating in it. They're very, very even keel. They're very, very peaceful. They're very, very meditative. The third group of people are the in-betweeners. They're bridging the anchor points to the front runners. They're bringing the energy of the anchor points up to the front runners. It's a very important role. But they feel like yo-yos. They feel like 1 minute I'm okay and the next minute I'm not, because they are literally running between these two frequencies in order to bridge them to these two groups of light workers. Light workers are collaborating at night when you sleep, when you dream. No wonder you don't feel rested, because very often during that dream time, our higher soul selves, plural, are in collaboration and communication, especially now that we've won the timeline back. Light workers are now holding creative license to run that timeline forward. This was always going to happen. We were always going to get that license, so to speak. But it came in with such a sudden bang. And we went into collaboration, kind of like, okay, guys, we've got this thing. What are we going to do now? Right, let's just quantum shift, bring in the ancestors, help us resolve this debris. And it's kind of like the ancestors and the higher soul selves were going, guys, this is going to be a little bit of a rough break, a little bit of a jerk on the timeline. And we said, so be it. So be it, because we've had enough of how things were. We've had enough of the repetition of the past. And part of those who are at the breaking point, of course, it's a breakthrough, right? But before a breakthrough, you feel like you're going to break down. Those who are at that break point, leading the timeline to its end, you exist in both places. You exist already on the higher timeline, and you haven't yet integrated and absorbed the lower timeline. So right now you are still in these two worlds, and pretty much everybody is. The front runners, however, because they're in the front, they hop up first. And when they get into the higher timeline, they're the ones that are going to go, I feel like I'm in a room that I don't know if I'm allowed to be in, because the frequency is so much higher up here than where they remember. By the way, I did say to you there's 4 groups of people, right? There's 4 groups of people. I've only explained to you 3, the front runners, the in-betweeners, the anchor points. The 4th group, they're the weights. They're the ones who are holding everything back. They're the ones stuck in victimhood, self-pity, refusal to change. They're the people who are just creating density. But they are becoming less and less important because the timeline that we're shifting to is no longer answering to them. So we're going to feel less and less responsibility for the dead weights. And I don't mean that in an ugly way. I don't mean that in a nasty way. We're just going to feel less and less responsibility, which is actually a good thing because it allows us to elevate more, elevate higher, and then it gives those holding the density a fright. Because they go, whoa, where did everybody go? Oh, we're not in the same frequency anymore, which translates to we're not on the same page, in the same room anymore. And they're going to now have a choice point. Do I want to follow my friends who've perhaps elevated higher? For those who shift into that higher timeline, I always feel like I need to create such clarity because people read into what I say. I'm not saying this is heaven and perfection. What I'm saying is it's an elevation wherein everything is easier, wherein healing is going to become easier. And here's an interesting thing that's going to happen. The people, remember I spoke about the 3 main architects of this timeline, right? They're going to swap roles as we go now into the higher timeline. In other words, the people who were the anchor points, they're going to become the front runners of the next timeline. The people who were the front runners, they're going to become the anchor points because we're collaborating with each other as light workers. We are supporting each other, coming together in a way that we haven't before because we now know we've got the helm. We're holding the reins. We can only do this collectively or pretty much not at all. Now, on this elevated timeline, so much interference took place there on the lower timeline. Now we are moving into a place of personal responsibility, higher timeline, personal responsibility that says, all of the measures that were put in place to drench the planet in darkness, to keep the false matrix as it was, to keep the structure of the false matrix. All of that intervention, we are the remedy for. We are the counterbalance for. And yes, we have got a phenomenon on the planet right now where we do have portals opening, stargates opening upon the planet. But what you're going to find is that many of the front runners, light workers up here on our new timeline, they're going to become the stargates. The human beings are going to become, each one of them, each one of us, the stargate. In other words, the opening through which higher consciousness comes. Yes, there will still be planetary stargates, but we are individually going to make ourselves an unstoppable force because we become a field of non-interference. The more personal responsibility we take, which means the less blame we hold, we become a field of non-interference, a field of sovereignty. And that means that those attempts to thwart frequency, those attempts to degrade and downgrade the frequency on the planet by the nefarious ones will become less and less effective to those holding the higher and higher frequencies. Now, I'm sure some of you are going to ask when are we going to conclude this journey of being kind of like in two places at the same time? When do we finish with that? It's going to be not the same day for everybody because it's kind of like a trickle process. We've got some people who are already through. We've got some people who are already on the elevated timeline. And what they're going to feel is kind of like they wake up one day, everything's resolved, everything's a lot more peaceful. And that doesn't mean that everything on the material, physical level is resolved, but more like in their mind it's resolved. More like, gee, it's not such a big issue as I thought it was. It's actually doable. This thing that I thought was insurmountable, nah, it's not so big. That's what it's going to feel like. That's what resolution looks like. So it always takes place energetically first, physically second. The physical resolution at the earthly material level, that'll catch up probably in about 3 months' time. But you're going to start with a relief in the mental realm. You're going to feel less mental anxiety, less emotional anxiety, and you're going to move into that state of higher consciousness, but you won't know where it came from. Unless you've watched this video, of course, or this is a good opportunity for me to ask you to share this with your friends who might really benefit from understanding this. Now, what happens if you don't understand this? Well, you're still going to make that shift. You're still going to be on one timeline, boom, and then suddenly you've elevated. You're still going to have that discombobulating moment. And what I call a moment, that move from the one timeline to the higher one, for some people will be a day, and for other people will be 3 to 4 months. For some people, you're going to go in between the two for a little while. Most of the front runners, however, will have shifted into that higher timeline within the first 6 weeks of it opening, and it's opened already. It's probably about 2 days old at the time of recording this video. More of the effect, more of the impact can be confusion, can be who am I now, what do I want now, listlessness, the things I used to love, I don't love anymore, like a review of your life. But that makes sense because look at this. Of course you're going to review your life because it's who am I now that I'm not carrying that heaviness? Who am I now that I'm not burdened? Who am I now that I'm not responsible? Am I going to feel discomfort in the lack of pain? In the lack of struggle? Am I going to feel discomfort? Is that going to be so unfamiliar to me that I'm going to try to reconjure it? That I'm going to try to reimagine it? Because we're creative, right? We are infinitely creative and all possibilities are attainable and available to us. That'll be a very sad thing that might happen, but front runners, for you guys, it's highly, highly unlikely. Our souls have just come together and said, this is it. Let's move forward at quantum speed. We've had so much holding back, and you're going to find a lot of these shifts, a lot of these jumps taking place now. My name is Kerry K. Follow me for more. We got so much to share, but as we leave, I want to share love from my heart. all the way into yours. I really do hope that you feel it. Go ahead and watch this video next. This is the convergence point that explains how all timelines have come into one place. Lots of love, everyone.